Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Dr. Erin Louise Bellamy is a metabolic health practitioner and is the founder of Integrative Ketogenic Research and Therapies, which uses principles of metabolic psychiatry to provide remote, highly personalized, one-on-one metabolic therapy for both psychiatric conditions and overall metabolic health. It goes as far as treating psychiatric conditions such as depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia, as well as overall metabolic health. Erin's mission is to empower individuals with comprehensive education, expert guidance, and consistent support in the understanding and practical application of metabolic interventions, including ketogenic metabolic therapy, to promote enhanced physical and mental well-being. Dr. Bellamy's approach is aimed at increasing the levels of ketones in your body, which are small molecules produced when the body breaks down fat. Ketones have been shown to protect the brain and reduce inflammation, and is a method to increase mitochondria and improve metabolic health, which in turn can have positive impacts on both physical and mental well-being. You can find Dr. Erin Bellamy on Twitter at IKRT_org or on our site, which is www.ikrt.org. Dr. Erin Bellamy, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Thank you so much, Casey. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and I haven't had an introduction like that in a long time, so thank you so much.
We tell everybody, if you want me to read it again at any point in this conversation to get a little boost for your self-esteem, you just let me know. I'll stop everything and reintroduce you. I have just followed your work for, as long as you've been on the scene. Obviously, this isn't your first rodeo. You've been doing this for several years. And I just really respect the work that you do. And it's such an honor to host you. We're obviously going to deep dive into your personal history and how you got into this and the research that you've done. Before we do that, I just want to know, pretend that you're on a bus and somebody sits down and maybe they have like 4 or 5 minutes with you and they ask you what you do. How do you explain what you do without sounding completely insane or without sounding like you're some diet zealot, that thinks this silly keto diet that I heard about on the news that kills people of heart disease is like helping people with very severe mental illnesses? How do you explain exactly what you do and try to make it impact without sounding completely nuts?
It's tough.
Good answer.
I think this is a great question because I mean this is something that happens all the time. I mean, I can think only recently I was visiting a family friend and they said, "Oh, I haven't seen you in 10 years. Like, how's it going? What are you doing now?" I'm like, "Oh, well, let me tell you." And so, the field of metabolic psychiatry, as you know, is quite new. And so really you have to kind of pull from, lots of different backgrounds and lots of different things to kind of explain it. But really simply, if I was sitting with somebody or meeting a family member or something like that, I would just say, first and foremost, I work with people to help improve their mental health. Okay. And so then usually that kind of brings people in. Okay, how do you do that? Are you a psychiatrist, or, are you a doctor, a physical doctor, or a mental health doctor? What are you? And I say, well, chartered psychologist, metabolic psychiatry principles, and so on. And then they're looking at me like, "Ooh, well, what is that?" And so I say, listen, did you know that by changing the food that you eat, you can actually change the state of your brain health, and you can improve your brain health, and you can make sure that your brain is functioning on a higher level than maybe you're used to? And they're kind of words that they've definitely not heard before. They're like, brain health, functioning at a higher level. Like, what is that? Maybe that's a bit woo-woo. What is that? And I say, no, what I do is I work with people to alter their nutrition and change the food that they eat. And by doing that, we can enter a very specific state that helps the brain and helps to heal the brain. And then sometimes they say, "Oh, well, heal isn't that a little bit woo-woo? Isn't that a little bit out there, this term heal?" Because I think you and I would probably agree it's been thrown away or thrown around a lot. And we kind of have to be careful about what we can say with certainty. And I'll say, there are definitely ways to improve the health of your brain. In some ways, it will heal it. In some ways, it will just improve its functioning. And then they're definitely on board by that point. So I just simply start with, did you know that nutrition can help improve brain health? And then get them hooked from there, and then slowly start to kind of feed in the idea of there being another fuel for the brain, another way to help improve the health of the brain. And then once they're kind of hooked at that point, then I can give them a little bit more information and trying to explain to them about, what is metabolic health, what is metabolism, these words that just go straight over people's heads, along with the word ketogenic, which also goes over people's heads. I just try and take it, really slowly with them and explain to them in simple terms what that looks like on a day-to-day basis and how it can make you feel.
Got it.
So hopefully
Okay.
that kind of gives you a little bit of an overview.
That's pretty great. Yeah, that's a pretty good way to explain that. I think after this episode, I am going to re-listen to that part over and over and over and over again, your explanation of that, until I have it perfectly memorized. And I'm going to present it exactly that way. I'll give you an example. Like, this was a few months ago when I went to the symposium for metabolic health. As I'm traveling to the conference, I'm riding in an Uber. My Uber driver is telling me how difficult it is to take care of his mother, who is a type 2 diabetic, and he has such crippling depression that sometimes he can't even work as an Uber driver. It crushes him. And here I am heading to this conference where we're talking about ketogenic diets and the amazing things they can do for type 2 diabetes. But also that day, that Thursday, was all about mental health, with all these amazing presenters like Nicole Laurent and Dr. Brett Scher and all these people doing such amazing work. Even that very day, as I was checking into my Airbnb, as I'm checking in, they're asking me like, what am I doing here? And I said, I'm attending this conference. It's all about like mental health today. And my host is like, wow, I've got, my sister is dealing with bipolar. And so like, I'm trying to explain like how people can contact me, what I do, and I hand out my cards and nobody gets back to me. And I think all of us in this space, like, we realize how amazing this work is. And we want so badly to make an impact on the people around us. And these people, like, they're not my friends. I don't know them. I don't have their phone number, but like, they're people, and I care about them, and I want them to reach out. And so trying to make that impact, I think, is, like you said, it's not that easy, but it's really, really important. And so finding ways to phrase that and help people understand kind of what people like you do, I think, is very important.
Thank you. Yeah, I completely agree with you. Your experience, my experience of family, Uber drivers, hotel receptionists, I think it's just about bringing them in. Even if you just have 2 minutes with them, you just simply say like, oh, I work in research, or I'm a clinician, or I work in this space. Did you know that nutrition can actually have a really strong impact on improving brain health and helping you to feel better in some cases? And usually that's enough for them to go, what? And then you say, here, like email me directly, like just message me and then we can talk about it. Or like, I'll send you some resources, give me your email. Because it's too difficult right now to explain in in a minute or two.
Yeah, well, like I said, we're going to get into your story. One thing that's very cool that you can attest to, since you've been doing this for so many years, is the crazy increase of awareness. This is actually finally seeming like it's moving forward. Like, so many people are actually doing research, and it's not like when you started where you feel like you're on an island and nobody is communicating with each other. Can you comment on the optimism that you must be feeling when you're starting to see, like, maybe, yeah, that was the first time some of these people had heard this message, but maybe it won't be the last, and that might kind of help move things along?
Absolutely. I look at it as if it's just planting a seed, because sometimes people are not even ready, right? But it's just planting the seed, and in 6 months, a year, by then they will have heard it somewhere else. And you know how these algorithms online work. So if you've looked at something once, it's just going to keep feeding it to you over and over again. So you might not have been the one to make that change for that person, but you planted that seed, and then they heard it and read it and saw it pop up like 10 more times, and then actually they were in a position to change their life on the back of that, or change maybe a loved one's life on the back of that. But going back to what you were saying about how this area has changed just in the last 5 years, it's phenomenal. I don't have any other word for it, because my background is psychology / psychiatric research, and historically in academia and in university settings, these are the disciplines and the areas that have very little money and very little funding. I went to some pretty good schools, and we always had like the prefab building rather than like the big fancy business building. There wasn't much money coming into the research side. And really, it's only thanks to some pretty dedicated people and pretty dedicated groups that thankfully have the funding and are channeling that funding into this research, that we can even be where we are right now. The research would be moving along for sure, it would, because I've been doing this since 2015, 2016. I'd still be doing it, but it would be at a much slower rate, and I would feel a lot more alone than I do now. This group and the field of metabolic psychiatry, as it is now coined, is really pulling together researchers, clinicians, and people with lived experience from across the world to really push this area forward. Whereas when I started, like, Zoom didn't even exist. So, if I wanted to send a message to Dr. Ian Campbell or somebody like that, it would be like pigeon mail. So we've come a long way. And really, even if it was to stay at this rate of progress, I would be happy. But I know that it's absolutely not going to stay at this rate. It's just going to go up and up and up, full speed ahead. So I'm on the train. I'm ready.
I love it. That's fantastic. Yeah, I cannot say enough about the Bazooki family and the
Yeah.
work that they've done. And I don't play a lot of computer games on my phone, but boy, do I promote Roblox and tell everybody they need to download Roblox so they can play and hopefully keep funding money into this field that family has been so generous, which is amazing. Let's back up and tell your own personal story. How did you get involved in this? Were you more involved in the nutrition side of things initially, or more the psychiatry things initially? Like, how did this come to your field of work?
Yeah, absolutely. So if anybody's listened to me already, I apologize. I am a little bit like a broken record with my story, but I think it's important because it kind of tells a story of someone who, I didn't intend to get here the way I did. My background was psychology. My undergrad, my thesis was kind of around eating disorders. That was always my interest. Then I did a master's in psychiatric research and did another thesis on eating disorders because I was always interested in diets. And I thought to myself, you know what? I'm going to become a clinical psychologist. And in the UK, a clinical psychologist is somebody who works with people, carries out things like CBT or talk therapy, different therapies to help an individual. And usually they work within the National Health Service, and there's a very specific way of doing things. But I thought, that's my direction. I want to become a psychologist and help people. And so in order for me to, after my master's, in order for me to kind of get onto this clinical program, I needed some experience within the National Health Service working with people who had, varying mental health conditions. So I started working on an inpatient psychiatric ward. And I actually worked on a couple in London. And I was like an assistant practitioner. I worked with people who were staying in these inpatient units day in and day out. Often they were on mental health sections, which meant that, they were being held there against their will. They were really unwell in the eyes of the hospital, and they were being treated there. So they were not able to come and go from the ward. And so I was working there day in and day out, night and day, helping them day to day with the life skills and, life on the ward, and trying to help them figure out how life on the outside would look when they leave, and helping them with their therapies and so on. And I was gaining a lot of experience. But on the side, I was still interested in eating disorders and diets. And at that time, it was like 2010, 2011. And, New Atkins for New You. I think Dr. Eric Westman had just been, they had redone the book or something like that. So that was like a renewed diet that came out, like Revisit Atkins. And, I was reading that in my spare time, and I thought, oh, I'll give this a go on a personal level because I had a little bit of weight to lose and I wasn't feeling 100%. And I started to feel really good with using this approach, which to me was mind blowing because, if we're thinking about a low carbohydrate or a ketogenic diet, it's the complete opposite of what we've been told to do. So I started doing that and I felt really good. And then I started thinking, wow, well, the research around this is showing at that time, 2013, 14, research for low carbohydrate ketogenic diets and type 2 diabetes was coming through thick and fast. And I thought, well, a lot of my patients have type 2 diabetes or abnormal blood sugar levels. And, what they're eating day to day is definitely not helping them in any way, right? It's a standard diet plus multiple takeaways throughout the week, etc. Like, it really wasn't great. I thought, I wonder if this could help their diabetes. Okay, when you look at those studies, a lot of those secondary outcomes were around mood. And it was saying, you know, people's moods were improving at the same time as their type 2 diabetes and they're losing weight, etc. I was like, wow, maybe there's something else here in the research around specifically mood improvements and low carb or ketogenic diets. And I went looking. There's still one paper that changed my life, 1965 pilot study on ketogenic diets for schizophrenia, where they took 11 inpatients, so on a psychiatric unit, who had treatment-resistant schizophrenia. In other words, they had tried multiple medications, multiple therapies, nothing was changing, nothing was moving, symptoms were not improving. They put them on a ketogenic diet, a loose one, may I add, not the kind that we're used to now and we as a clinician, you know, very loose. And within 2 weeks, symptoms improved, hallucinations, delusions improved. Didn't go away completely, but significantly improved across the board. Whereas up until then, nothing was changing. And then what's interesting is they reintroduced the standard diet, and 7 out of 10 of those individuals, their symptoms came back just like they were before. So yeah, you can say, okay, there's not that many people, okay, it's not a well-controlled study, etc. Okay, but for 1965, for them to have seen that improvement, I thought, oh my gosh, maybe we're onto something. This looks really cool. And I went looking for the rest of the research to see what's the follow-up, what happened, what's going on. And there wasn't anything. And I put that down to, you know, the introduction of antipsychotic medications came shortly after that or around that time. And, you know, medicine and psychiatry kind of took a little bit of a different direction, mainly using medications and so on. And I just thought to myself, well, I'm feeling really good on this ketogenic diet. And I'm reading this research, and this research is looking pretty good across the board. But I can't help my patients if there's no extra research from like the past 5 years at least to show that this might work for them from a mental health perspective. So I thought, oh my gosh, I don't think I can become a clinical psychologist. I'm going to have to go and do some research to see if this actually works before I can then be able to help people with it afterwards if it comes through as working or as having a positive outcome. So long story short, because I can go on and on and on. Long story short, I decided, okay, I'm going to do a PhD. Up until that point, I had always thought of myself as a people person and maybe not so much an academic, but I was kind of determined to do this research to see if it would work. So I started my PhD in 2016, looking at ketogenic diets, low carbohydrate diets, both of them for depression. And I finished that up last year. It took me a very long time as I was continuously working in the National Health Service as well, and then starting to work with people privately to implement ketogenic diets. And so fast forward all the way to where we are now, you know, PhD is done, the research is slowly being published. It takes a little bit longer than I thought to write them up and get the results out there. But this is where I am now. I get to be at the position where I have done the research and I continue doing research and publishing research, but then also I am now a clinician and I'm able to work with people just like I always wanted to do, to help them using ketogenic therapy and metabolic therapy to help improve mental health outcomes. So that was my journey, and it's been long, but it's been absolutely worth it. And I'm very, very lucky to have emerged from the PhD at a time where suddenly things were just starting to lift off within this metabolic psychiatry community. So yeah, I'm lucky in that respect.
That's so amazing. I'm so glad you brought up that study. I remember when I first heard you mention it, and I was out on a walk, actually. I remember exactly where I was. I was out on a walk, and I remember Googling it, and I was able to find the study, but I couldn't find any details about the study. It was just like the title, and it didn't necessarily say anything else. And so I'm glad you brought up some of those details. And it is curious to wonder, like, why was there not a follow-up? Why wasn't somebody else curious about it? And it's like you said, like this confluence was with the time that medications were coming out. And so, of course, it's like, well, you could take this course where you're changing your diet and, you know, that's so hard for people, which I definitely want to talk to you about. You know, they're not going to want to eat this way, and their friends don't eat this way, and we can just give them the pill, and maybe the pill will do about the same. So let's just focus on this and not that. Plus, we make money when we sell a pill. So it's kind of interesting that there wasn't more like follow up, and that study again, like for me, I couldn't find any details about it. You know.
Yeah. And so, it's funny, right? I I don't know if I believe in fate. It's a whole separate thing. I'm Irish, so maybe I believe in something. But this paper, like I don't even know how it like fell into my lap, because it's one of those papers you have to pay for it. You have to pay. It's one of the ones behind a paywall, and back then there was no such thing as open access, right? So you had to pay for it. And I mean, these days you have to pay for a lot of papers, and nobody pays for these papers because you're expected to pay large amounts of money just to see a paper. It usually doesn't happen. You try and get an abstract on PubMed, and then if it's really, really important, you try and get a full text somewhere through a library. But there was just something about it. I think maybe because it was the only one and the title was so firm on pilot schizophrenia ketogenic diet, that I was like, I emailed so many people, so many clinicians and researchers that I knew at the time, asking, can you get access to this paper? Can you get access? And everybody was coming back and saying, no, 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 I can't. So to date, it's the only paper I have ever paid for. And thank goodness I did, because it was the paper that completely changed everything for me. What's interesting is in that paper, they reference some previous research back in the 1950s, which was already showing, or had already been published, and was showing that people who had schizophrenia were showing some intolerance to carbohydrates and the inability to metabolize them, and kind of having reactions to them. And also they noticed that just before they maybe had a psychotic episode or went into psychosis, they had an increase in carbohydrate consumption. And so that was then, 10 years prior to this 1965 paper. And I think even Dr. Chris Palmer recently was speaking, and he mentioned, I think as far back as like the 1920s, yes, we've got the epilepsy ketogenic diet research, but I think he noted that, specifically there is some mental health, maybe schizophrenia, I'm not quite sure, information around inability to metabolize carbohydrate, and issues with core metabolism. So, this has been in the research, kind of hidden for a while. It's just now, thanks to Dr. Chris Palmer pulling all that information together, and like a few of us trying to, really get through it, we are trying to, pull it together and put the pieces of the puzzle together. The other thing, just on that paper with the three authors, Pacheco, Easterling, and Pryor, I'm a true researcher because I went looking for them all, because I wanted to know, hello, where's the follow-up? Like, I'm over
Yeah.
here in 2013, 14. And one of them, unfortunately, had passed away. The other one, I couldn't get in contact with. And then the third one went on to be like the 44th president of Costa Rica.
Wow.
So yeah, I know, right? He was a psychiatrist, but then ended up being the president. And so I actually have a call booked with him. I managed to figure it out, and I managed to get a contact for him, and I have a call booked with him in a couple of weeks' time. So
No way.
obviously he's a lot older now, and my Spanish is not is not that great, but I will give it my best to try and explain to him what we're doing, and that his study was pretty much the starting point, well, for me anyway. And then I will get to ask him that very important question.
Oh my
Where's the
goodness.
follow-up? So yeah,
Wow. Oh, that's amazing.
isn't it cool?
If I could be a fly on the wall for that interview, that would be absolutely amazing. Are you planning on like recording that, or trying to share that around or something?
I wasn't going to, because when I spoke with, when I was getting the details, the people I was speaking to were saying, you just need to be careful, because, in terms of protecting privacy, and because I think he's a little bit older now, maybe in his 80s. So I'm just going to take all the good wishes and the good wills, and pass them along, and, just kind of show that maybe he didn't think that his paper had much of an impact, but actually, it really has been the catalyst for so many things.
Oh,
Um, and then
that's
maybe he'll
amazing.
my question.
That's amazing. Well, I'm taking Spanish lessons on Duolingo, so I'm
Right.
brushing up in time to hopefully hear how that interview went. That is incredible. What a cool opportunity to, at the very least, thank him for changing the course of your entire life. It's so funny how we're finding some of these studies coming out of the woodworks. Like I always lament the fact that the George Cahill studies from the 60s and 70s never made it into my nutrition courses when it explains so many amazing things about the human body and how we use ketones and all these different things. It's so incredible, but nobody knows about these studies, even though they're seminal. They explain so much. I mean, we even just had Neil Geit on the show, and he just swam 22 miles of Loch Lomond in Scotland, completely fasted, and tested his blood sugar the whole time. His blood sugar was down to 40 at some points, and he was fine. And it's like, understanding the Cahill studies, you understand that he was so ketogenic that was helping him. He didn't, have a hypo event and drown himself. Like, he was fine the whole time. We have these explanations from some of these studies that appear to be almost like lost. I'm so glad you were so motivated to like actually pay for that study.
Yeah, me too. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be here.
Worth it. Totally
Yeah.
worth it. Okay, so I've had some people explain that the benefits of ketogenic diets and mental health are more to do with the elimination of ultra processed foods. If you're eating ketogenic, you're not eating the crappy inflammatory seed oils and sugar and gluten. Other people we've had on the show, Nicole Laurent, I'll bring her up again, has made the case that it's actually the addition of the ketones that makes the biggest difference. And I think it's very cool that it's likely both things, right? Obviously, ultra processed food, if you can eliminate that, that's going to help. But I'm more on the side of like, it's actually the ketones that are kind of a bit magic when it comes to this, and they're making a huge difference. Can you explain what it is about ketones themselves and being in a ketogenic state that is the active, most beneficial thing about a ketogenic diet and mental health?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree with you. It is, I think it is both. Like, my research shows that you can follow a low carbohydrate, not ketogenic diet, and you can see improvements in your mental health. Absolutely. There's no two ways about it. It's in the research, it's shown. However, once you move your body into a ketogenic state, so once your liver starts to break down fat and create those really cute little molecules, I look at them as like little golden coins. Once you start to create those ketones have so many different mechanisms. From my research, when I was looking at the mechanisms of ketones and the mechanisms of depression, and seeing if one mechanism of depression could be cancelled out by one mechanism of ketones. And I found like 52 or 53 mechanisms whereby that happens. And then I had to stop because I wasn't doing a biochemical or, biological PhD. I was doing a psychology degree. So I just had to stop there. Otherwise, I could have kept going. And that just shows that actually we don't know all the mechanisms yet by which the ketones themselves work, but we do know there's more than 50. And if you take 1 year to look at each of those, we're going to be here for another 50 years. So we don't really have time to wait for that. That can be going on in the background. But back to your question, those little ketone molecules themselves, they are anti-inflammatory, as we know, and neuroinflammation, brain inflammation is the crux, or one of the cruxes of mental illness and poor mental health. They are neuroprotective, so they protect the brain. They help to put the brain in a protective state. They are anxiolytic. In other words, they have been shown to reduce anxiety. So those little molecules in and of themselves, the presence of those reduce anxiety. So like, if you could just wrap that up into a pill, like, people would be making so much money, but that's not the case right now. We could talk about exogenous ketones separately, but these ketones have the ability to reduce anxiety in and of themselves. And you don't get that when you're following a low carbohydrate diet where you're not entering that state of ketosis. So I look at this state of ketosis as a therapeutic state, a state where everybody could probably benefit from a period of time in ketosis for whatever it is that they've got going on. Because what it does is it just gives your body time to reset, clean up, fix things rather than always being on the go all the time in the environment in which we live. So those ketones themselves, they just have so many benefits that you do not get from exogenous medications or from low carbohydrate diets or from any supplements or anything like that. No blueberry extract or anything like this is going to do what the ketones themselves do. And so that's why they are so important. And that's why it's separate to following a low carbohydrate diet to improve your mental health.
The topic of this conversation today is primarily the neck up, right? Like we're talking about brain health. The same things apply from the neck down, like all the benefits of ketones all over the body. Like we know how much it helps with gut repair and how we use it for energy, and the heart gobbles up ketones. It's so interesting to notice that we're only talking about a small percentage of the body, but there's still so much benefit. I absolutely love that. You have a real talent of making this very practical for people, which I really enjoy. And I think you've talked in the past about how to make this kind of like a gradual transition. Like I think it's okay if some people want to be, really gung-ho and jump right into it. But the way you help coach people is very practical, and it's also pragmatic, and it helps people kind of transition gradually. What are some of the key important things that you want people to know about implementing ketogenic diets?
Yeah, I think the first thing is you have to be careful initially, because you need to look at I'm not a psychiatrist, okay? And so when it comes to diagnoses, I know they can vary and lots of people would question diagnoses, but diagnoses and symptoms of mental health conditions, you need to have a look at those, because if you, say, for example, have bipolar disorder, or if you have experienced something like hypomania or mania, whereby, you have changes in behavior and, you lose out on sleep, and it can become quite dangerous if it's left untreated. You can end up in hospital. People who have bipolar disorder, schizoaffective disorder, or have experienced mania or hypomania, those individuals need to be a little bit careful in that they need to take maybe a slightly slower approach to a ketogenic diet. In other words, don't jump straight in. Just take it nice and slow and gradually work your way down to, remove the ultra processed foods first, then move into a low carbohydrate diet, stay there for a little bit, and then move into ketosis slowly. Because if they jump straight in, sometimes this can trigger, disrupted sleep and so on, and it can trigger things like mania, hypomania. And if you're not working with a professional who can notice that, and oftentimes you don't notice it yourself, then it can be a little bit tricky and you might get into trouble. If you don't have that risk, and generally speaking, your symptoms are severe for you, but you don't have that risk of hypomania, you can kind of move into a ketogenic diet pretty quickly if you want to, if you just want to get into ketosis and do that straight away. But to be honest, we need to balance our life. Like, it's not like we're all just sitting at home. We don't have family and friends. We don't have jobs, etc. If we did, then we could just jump in. But it's not a small undertaking, to start a ketogenic diet. You have to learn quite a lot, and you have to make sure that the information that you get is accurate and is correct for your individual goal. A ketogenic diet's different if you are building muscle, losing weight, using it for epilepsy, or using it for mental health conditions. So really, so that you don't get overwhelmed and stressed out and then say, oh, well, this didn't work for me. What I always say to people is just to take the slow route, right? Because to be honest, if you take 3 months to get into ketosis, those 3 months were going to go by anyway. So it's best just to take your time and do it slowly and do it properly, so that you don't get completely overwhelmed, or you don't end up feeling really rubbish, halfway through the keto flu because you haven't learned what an electrolyte is yet. That's that you're not really giving it the time it needs, and then you're going to be hard on yourself when it doesn't work. So I simply just say, remove the ultra processed foods first, then move to a low carbohydrate diet. And you know what, Casey? Sometimes a low carbohydrate diet is enough for people. Sometimes they don't even need, I would argue that everybody could benefit from a time in ketosis, right? But they don't need it, because sometimes they feel much better with a low carbohydrate diet, and they don't want to take that next step because actually they're feeling much better than they did before, and they're fine where they are.
Mm.
And then sometimes people say, yeah, like I'm feeling a bit better, but I want to go all the way. I want to get into ketosis. I want to see what it can do for me. And then I say, okay, let's move into ketosis. Let's get the ketone levels up. Let's see how you feel at different levels of ketones and try that for a period of time. And I'll support you along the way. And then we'll discuss whether this is working or not. So I really like the tiered approach because it's just less overwhelming for everyone and more likely that somebody will do it.
Yeah, I like that. Whenever I've changed a habit in my life, the slower I went, the more permanent the change. If I tried to just cut something off immediately, it didn't seem to last very long. Or if it was more like gradual, like you're explaining, it seemed to last much longer. I really like that. And I agree with you completely, actually, about the low carbohydrate for a lot of people might be where they want to like hang out and that's good enough for them. And I agree with you. I think that is far, far, far better than what everybody else is doing in the world. So I would be happy if somebody did that. But I do agree that in most instances, I would be much happier if somebody was willing to take the next step into keto. For some people, taking the next step into a carnivore diet for a little while to see if that addresses, autoimmunity or gut issues or anything else. I think it's worth it to at least try. You can always back off of it if you don't like it, but I find that there's not many people that don't end up really liking it. So I agree with you. I think that was really well said. And that is a great segue that you brought up to a study that you did recently about the feasibility of a ketogenic diet. Like you said, you don't want to be overwhelming people who are probably already overwhelmed and have this big thing that they're doing. You would think like nobody's going to have the bandwidth, especially if they're already dealing with mental health, to be able to do this diet on their own seemingly. And you've actually looked into that and found that people actually can do the diet and are more than willing to. Can you explain how your study worked?
Yeah, so my PhD was kind of large, but I'll try and keep it brief. So I did a randomized control trial, and so I had people who had depressive symptoms, so they had depression, and then people who had little to no depressive symptoms, so quote unquote healthy for the terms of the research. And then I split them into ketogenic diet, low carbohydrate diet, and control. So got lots of groups there, 6 groups altogether. And so I put them on they went through a remote care model. So they had an app and they had some videos, educational videos, things like that. They could track their food. They were told what to do and where to keep their macros, etc. And this is at a time when nobody even knew what a ketogenic diet was. So it's not that people really knew what was going on. They were blinded. They were just told, listen, like we're going to look at how this food affects your mood. It was very, very hands-off, very, very simple. And I found that, and this is actually the most interesting thing, I found that the low carbohydrate group, they improved across the board in terms of their mental health outcomes. Their psychological well-being improved. So that was really interesting to me. Kind of made sense. That's what I thought would happen. But the ketogenic diet group, from the quantitative, so the numbers, the stats, it was not significant. And it showed that therefore people's psychological outcomes did not improve. I was like, what? Like, how can the low carb improve, but then the ketogenic didn't? I was like, this is very strange. So then I interviewed people who did the ketogenic intervention, and the people who spoke to me, they said, yeah, like I had a great time, did it really like it, absolutely life-changing, so much so that some people said that they went from having little to no motivation in life and no meaning and purpose in life to afterwards having a complete renewed sense of purpose and meaning in life and just could get up and go. And every time I read their quotes, I would get shivers down my arms because like how you can do that in such a short amount of time was mind-blowing to me. But at the same time, I was like, well, there's a disconnect because if these people that did the ketogenic intervention are telling me that with their words, they're telling me their experience and their story, they're not lying, but the stats are telling me otherwise, what's going on? So I went back to look at the stats and looked at the numbers, the statistics, and I had quite a large dropout. Quite a lot of the people had dropped out of the study, both the ketogenic and the low carbohydrate intervention, but predominantly the ketogenic intervention. So the people that I'd spoken to that did really well are the ones that stayed on it, found the benefits, felt great, and were like singing its praises at the end. So I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to do another study. I'm going to have to try and contact these people who dropped out to see why they dropped out. Like, what happened? So I did that. And a lot of people responded to me and said, the main reason why I dropped out is because I found it difficult.
Mm.
Now, I don't want people now to, don't snippet this and put this online and say the ketogenic diet is difficult, because that's not what I'm saying at all. What it came down to was there was no accountability and support built in to this study to give those individuals the hand holding that they needed to make such a big change in their life. It's a big deal learning what a ketone is and how you even test that. What's a carbohydrate? Like, what do you mean I can't eat birthday cake at my son's birthday party? There's a lot of things, a lot of support that people need to make those changes on an individual level, but also to figure out the social aspect once you've figured out how to do it yourself. That was not built into the study. And so the people that did really well had the support at home. They were able to navigate through that and find those benefits. But the people that dropped out, they didn't have that. They didn't have that accountability and support, and it wasn't built into the research project. So now I'm a big advocate of accountability and support. And this is why I do what I do. And this is why I work with people the way I do, because you need the accountability and support and guidance the whole way through this process, because it's more than just getting into ketosis and seeing what happens. It's all the other things that happen too that you need hand holding with, and you need somebody by your side. So it took me on a journey, the PhD, and I learned a lot. And I think the research community, when it's published, will learn a lot about how to create those studies and what, how to add in that accountability aspect, and that coaching aspect is vitally important for people to be able to have some support, even peer support, to be able to maintain this long term.
Wow, that is absolutely fascinating. And like you said, it makes so much sense why you're doing what you do today because of that. That's so very interesting. Before we talk about that, I just have to ask you, since it's a huge interest of yours, the eating disorder side of things. We're starting to get more and more data. One of my favorite presentations at the symposium that I just got back from was Frank Guido, PhD, and he presented case studies on anorexia nervosa. And I've often commented, like, it's so interesting that this diet helps overweight people lose weight and helps underweight people gain weight. Like, it just seems to be this magical thing that helps everybody kind of stabilize into whatever weight is really best for them. You must be feeling amazing about some of the research that's coming out as far as eating disorders.
Yeah, absolutely. It was always my first love, like I said. And so I always think that I always thought it was going to be the last to the party here, because there are so many disciplines that are kind of involved with eating disorders. But the work that Guido Frank is doing is incredible. In terms of the anorexia research, there's some research showing that even the animal-based ketogenic diet can take people from not being weight stable up to weight stable and put anorexia into remission for some people, even if they have dealt with this for 20-25 years. What I'm most interested in, and actually I'm working on a paper that will be submitted soon, and hopefully will come out in Frontiers, is around binge eating. And so binge eating / food addiction. And so I recently ran a kind of pilot trial with some people in the UK through the Public Health Collaboration and something called the Liberate Project, where we used, it wasn't even ketogenic, it was more like the Freshwell Guide, kind of low carbohydrate, high protein, moderate fat, and use that for helping people with binge eating and food addiction. And the results are overwhelmingly positive. Obviously, I can't speak too much to it, but overwhelmingly positive. And so that will be coming out soon. And I think on the back of that, there will be a lot more research, especially, more specifically into ketogenic diets and how they can work for that. And then also I'm working on a paper right now just to kind of help diffuse this. There's a slight tension around this idea that all foods fit for eating disorders. In other words, everybody should be able to eat in moderation, and you can't remove a food group because that's going to cause an eating disorder. And when you look at the research from the research I've done, that's actually not the case. It seems to be more so when you calorie restrict for too long that can contribute to eating disorder behavior, rather than removing a non-essential food group like a carbohydrate, because carbohydrates are not essential for life. And so, there's a little bit of confusion there. And also what I'm seeing clinically, you know, I have a food addiction program, a binge eating program, where when people get into ketosis, that midbrain, that food chatter, the mind chatter, the constant talking in your head, getting you to binge, getting you to overeat, getting you to secret eat, manipulate people to get what you want in terms of food, all of that just seems to calm right down. And oh, I just gave myself shivers. It's incredible, actually, you know, how calm people can be and how that behavior can just stop. So I'm very, very excited about what's to come within the eating disorder sphere, for sure.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, I really hope that idea dies, that like this is a quote unquote restrictive diet and restricting food groups and that kind of thing. Like I really hope that dies away as people realize how healing this diet is and how unrestricted it can be, you know, when you're in this ballpark. I love that. And it's a good thing that all of us are so passionate about ketogenic diets, and we're all mostly ketogenic ourselves, so we have lots of energy to do all kinds of stuff, and you have so many things going on all the time. You've done so much research already. You've got so many papers coming up. Tell us about also the work that you're doing in private practice. I hope I get the acronym right. IKRT.org is your website. Tell us about the work that you're doing with people on an individual and also, I believe, group levels as well, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, the IKRT, I definitely should have chosen something shorter, but I couldn't find something that fit. So that's where we are. Yes. So the way I work with people, I work with people one-on-one because often I find that people who they've kind of like, it's kind of like they come to me and they say, this is the last thing I'm going to try. Right. Like a lot of people come and they say, I've tried everything and you know, I just don't think I'm going to be cut out for this, but I'm going to give this one last shot and we'll see how it goes.
Oh,
And so oftentimes those people need a lot of one-to-one support, right? And so I have this one-to-one program. It starts at 12 weeks, but then of course it can go on for as long as that person needs individual support. And I work with them week on week to just start where they are and work slowly down to ketosis and then into ketosis and then up, tracking ketone levels, etc., monitoring with psychological forms, making sure that I can be in communication with their psychiatrist and with their mental health team if they have one, because you know if something happens whereby they might experience medication potentiation, in other words, their medication they're on might be too strong because the therapy is working, then the psychiatrist needs to step in and adjust things. And so I want to be there kind of the whole way along to help support that individual. So I work one-to-one with people, but you know, one-to-one doesn't reach the many. It doesn't reach the thousands and doesn't reach worldwide the people that I want to reach and that we all want to reach. And so I then decided that I would create two more programs. So I have a online self-learning program, which will be launching the beginning of November, where you know, there's 15 to 20 hours of content there. It's pretty much everything from the one-to-one program, but all recorded by me with lots of resources where the individual can go through in their own time, no rush whatsoever. They can just do it step by step. And then they've got weekly support calls with other people where they can come, ask questions, get peer support, and just kind of do this in their own time. So that's a nice way of approaching it, in that there's no rush, there's no pressure to do it all in one, you know, you don't have to commit 100% to doing it in 3 months. You just take it at your own pace. And then what's really exciting, especially because I was talking to you about the accountability and the support, is the group program that I have. And so this is the third time that I'm running it now. It's starting November 4th, and it kind of they start every 3 months. There's a couple of them that go on each year. And this is small groups of people, you know, 10, 11 people in a group. We have education for the first 8 weeks, education specifically on ketogenic therapy and other metabolic therapies for mental health conditions, right? So they are understanding and learning the correct science and the correct application. And then they're supported to implement low carb initially and then into ketosis. After the 8 weeks of education, we then just continue to meet weekly for 6 months or longer. The program is 6 months, but we can go on longer. So every week they can come, they've got questions that can be answered. We troubleshoot if they're stuck with their ketones or if they're struggling with social occasions or traveling, or they're, you know, they got some weird symptoms. We just come together and support one another. And so my goal with this is that with all the group programs that start every 3 months, we have this core group, but then those support sessions get bigger and bigger. And then ultimately we have a community of people who are all doing this for their mental health, all at different levels, but they've all had the right information given to them. And they're all singing from the same hymn sheet. They may have different experiences and different things will have worked for them, but they're all coming at it from the same perspective. Because what I find is there are so many resources online and there are so many groups. And sometimes I have a look at these groups and just the information there is so inaccurate and so dangerous if somebody was just to take it and implement it. And I just feel like I can't have that for people. I just want people to come to the group and at least they know that the research and the information that they're given is coming from the research or is coming from my clinical experience. We're learning from one another and they can feel like they're in a safe environment that's really supportive. And so, yeah, I'm really excited about the group stuff and the group support, and it's international. So people can join from all over the world, as long as the time zone works. That the education is pre-recorded, so you can always watch the recordings whenever you want, as many times as you want. And you have those support group calls that you can join, as often as you want to get that support you need. So yeah,
I
that's
think
what I'm
it's
excited about.
so awesome, and it's so validating to know that people would do the program multiple times. Like it's not that they need it, it's that they feel supported in the community and they start contributing. Like I found, like, doing group stuff, it sounds one way from the person who kind of got you into this, and I'm telling and educating and trying to talk about things, but it's so much more validating as well to hear other people who have gone through it and they are offering support and they're also helping. It's not just my dumb self in front of everybody trying to convince people. It's all these other people that have built up experience and are so lit up by their experience that they're willing to share it with others. And that it sounds like the exact vibe that you've got in the group as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I haven't experienced hallucinations myself. I'm lucky enough to have never experienced that. I know what it could be like based on multiple people telling me, but I don't have that experience. So when you have two people and one person saying, gosh, I'm actually, I'm kind of worsening of symptoms in this first couple of weeks. I don't know if I want to continue. And then you've got somebody else saying, well, when I get my ketones above X, I don't have any hallucinations. Like, what? That person doesn't have any hallucinations. Like, I can't, that is so much more powerful coming from that other individual than me saying you might not have hallucinations if you get your ketones over XYZ, right? It's way more powerful coming from someone else. And it might not be the same experience. That person might try it and not have the same outcome, but just knowing that somebody else is doing the same thing, is experiencing the same thing, and is on that same level, there's nothing I can't do that. I can do everything else, but I can't do that. I'm not that peer, and that's why that peer support is so important.
That's incredible. Wow. Well, I'm kind of going to put you on the spot here and say we should do another episode sometime to hear about some of the stories that are coming from this group. If you ever want to take time to do another episode, I would love to chat to you again and just see how some of these people are doing and capture some of the stories. Your work is
Yeah.
incredible. I really, like I said, really respect the work that you're doing, and to have the curiosity and then the courage to go out and kind of study this when it wasn't mainstream and when you felt like you were completely alone, but you still having the desire to go out and do this, I think is absolutely wonderful. Dr. Ellen Bellamy, where would you like people to go to find you and connect with you in your work?
Yeah, so thank you so much. You can find me at ikrt.org, but also you can find me on social media. So Erin Louise Bellamy for Twitter, or IKRT_org for Twitter, and then LinkedIn and Instagram. Just put my name into Google and I'll pop up and you'll be able to come and find me. You can email me and I'll get back to you. I can't give you a time as to how quickly I'll get back to you, but I will of course get back to you. And, if I can't help you, I will point you in the direction of someone that can, because I can't say that I can help everyone, but I can definitely point you towards other people that can help you if I can't. And so I think that's what it's all about, right? Making
Yeah.
sure that people get the help that they need. If it's not with me, it's with someone else. And that's the way we're going to do it.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's one of the benefits of being a metabolic health practitioner is you now have a network of all kinds of people around the world who are at a certain level of understanding with this stuff. So it's really wonderful work. Thank you again so very much for coming on our show to talk about some of your work. I'm so excited to see what the future holds for you in the research and how many lives you're going to be able to touch. I'm so excited to hear about what happens with this call that you're going to have in a few weeks with that the person that did the study. But for now, thank you so very much for everything you do, and thank you for taking time to be on our show today, Dr. Bellamy. We really appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Casey. It was an absolute honor. And yeah, I can't wait to catch up with you again soon.
That'll be fantastic. Thanks again. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.